You are now about to witness the strength of street knowledge.
What's up, ladies? How y'all doing? It is your girl, your diva in knowledge, Lady Mocha, representing Mocha's Ladies Lounge. I appreciate everybody for the feedback that I did the last upload where I talked about Tisha and Kimmy, the appliance wife. Definitely glad that all of y'all was able to view that. If you haven't already, I suggest that you check it out and get some real insightful information on how a lot of married women will put themselves in a position in which they basically can only find an identity within their marriage and by getting acceptance and approval specifically based off the merits of their husbands. So y'all, this definitely is going to tie in with the Mocha's documentary that I'm going to do today, as I have assured all of you. And yes, we are going to talk about it, y'all. We are going to talk about the Betty Broderick story. Now, if y'all are not familiar with this case at all, I would suggest that you go on YouTube and view the movie. Now, it's so much that ties into the story that they had to create a part 1 and a part 2. Okay, so I'm going to let y'all know right quick. I'm going to pull it up on YouTube. I'm not going to play it, but at your own leisure, when you have some downtime, definitely invest in watching this movie, the Betty Broderick story, because it speaks volumes for married women or women in general that seem to build an identity through their marriage and through having a family. And when this dream or this platform of being a wife does not work out in your favor, then you're totally lost, right? So anyway, I'm going to just show y'all where y'all can view it right quick. Now, if you go on YouTube and you put in a Betty Broderick story, you have to watch both parts so you don't be lost in the sauce. Go to A Woman Scorned, the Betty Broderick story. Now, it is an old classic, right? It came out in the 80s and the 90s, but Meredith Baxter did a hell of a job playing this role, and she did the darn thing, okay? Now, of course, there's other documentaries that really are more thorough and detailed, but this is the second part, Betty Broderick Part 2, Her Final Fury. So you have to watch Betty Broderick Part 2, Her Final Fury, and Part 1, A Woman Scorned, okay? So if y'all got nothing to do this weekend, hey, go get you a glass of wine, go in your she shed or in your bedroom, and I advise you watch this. I think all women who have been in this situation can kind of relate, and it's women who have never been in this situation. But I would tell women this: even if you've never experienced something, it's very imperative that you learn and from other women who have experienced it, because it can always be you. You may be one of the ones that get blessed and you never have to experience it, but you need to understand the detriment of what a woman goes through when she places her whole identity around her husband and her family. And basically that is what your identity is based upon. So y'all, right quick, I just want to make sure, I just want to move this here, y'all, because like I said, I get paranoid, y'all, when I don't see that little those little lights moving. Because last time I was up here recording my butt off and nothing was getting recorded. So yeah, I just want to make sure them lights is on. The lights is on. Please hit the like button, by the way, if you have not already. So let's get into talking about the Betty Broderick story. Okay, for those of y'all who are not aware, now you got to realize, you got to picture this back in the 80s when we wore that Aquanet hairspray. Okay, when we wore leggings, and when we wore the socks with the little cotton ball in the back, stuff like that, right? You have to go back to that time and era, because if you try to visualize this in today's era, it's not going to make any sense to you. So I need you to visualize this happening during the 80s. There was no cell phones, okay? There was no YouTube. There was no TikTok on how to deal with situations like this, okay? There was no social media, period, all right? So before you be judgmental and be on some, why did she accept that? Why did she deal with that? Why she didn't do X, Y, Z? Keep in mind, this is the freaking 80s, y'all. Okay? So you can't go into an 80s situation with 2026 mind concept. Back then, women did not have the rights that they have today. Back then, women didn't have the knowledge that they have today. So please be fair when you go in the comment section, okay? Talking about what Betty should have did, could have did, whatever. If it's not, if you're giving advice or you're speaking from the mindset of a woman in 2026 today, it's not going to fit. Okay, so this happened in the 80s, right? Okay, so the whole purpose of me doing the Betty Broderick documentary, y'all, is because this is a warning about what can happen when a woman builds her whole identity around a man, a marriage, like Tisha Scott would say, marriage, okay? So when a woman builds her whole identity around a man, a marriage, and a role that can be taken from her. Betty's case involved a long, ugly divorce. An affair, she said, began in 1983, separation and filings in 1985, and the murders of Dan Broderick and 𝓜𝓸𝓬𝓱𝓪'𝓼 on November 5th, 1989. She was later convicted of 2 counts of second-degree murder. Okay, so we're going to get into all of the elements. Now, let me start off by saying everything I say in this video is based off of educational, entertainment purposes only. I'm giving perspective from my own opinion. I do not know any of these individuals from scratch. I'm providing sources from other social media sites, in addition to documentaries, in addition to the movies. So a lot of the information that's going to be included in this documentary that I'm doing, it may have some discrepancies here and there, but for the most part, most of the information I'm going to provide is going to be pretty much dead on, very close to what Betty Broderick had experienced. So this is my disclaimer, okay? Just in case one of the Brodericks get a hold of this and try to make it like, oh, that you don't know my mother, you don't know my father. Hey, I can just go by the sources that was provided to me. Okay, because this is a very sensitive issue. Okay, and believe it or not, a lot of families are still grieving from this. Okay, even though this has happened every bit of 40 something years ago. All right, so let's pretty much get into it. Let's talk about Betty Broderick, right? Because we need to understand how severe these type of situations can impact a woman. Please hit the like button if you have not already. So Betty Broderick's story is one of the clearest examples of what can happen when a woman makes being a wife and a mother her whole entire identity. Betty appeared to live the dream. Marriage, children, status, money, and social standing. But when that marriage collapsed, she did not just lose her husband, she lost the role she had built her whole entire life around. The kind of identity collapse can send somebody into emotional panic when they have nothing else to stand on. Betty's story is tragic, disturbing, and criminal, but it is also a warning. Women cannot afford to build a life where all their worth, purpose, and future is tied to a man's loyalty, because men are not guaranteed to stay and vows are not always honored, okay? So, let me also state this, that I do not condone violence. I do not condone Betty Broderick's behavior, because at the end of the day, I don't care how much I have identified yourself to your marriage and your children. You still have to respect the fact when a man has decided he no longer values the things that you value. He no longer loves you the way that you love him. He no longer seeks any purpose and understanding that his marriage still should be preserved. And you have to respect that. You have to respect if a man says, I don't want this marriage anymore. I'm not in love with you anymore. I don't want to build anything with you anymore. And guess what? This is, and they have the right to walk away, even when you were the reason they started their business, they started their company, even though you sacrificed everything. You let go of a lot of things just for them to build their dream. You sacrificed your own dreams just to help them uphold theirs. And keep in mind, this is the chance that you take when you put them first and you make men your God and you make them your everything. And women need to understand, even in the marriage, no matter how much you value your husband, you cannot make him your God. You cannot make him your everything. And what I mean by that is you have to have a life for yourself outside of them. You have to have other things going for you, other goals, other dreams, other plans, because if these men decide that they no longer want to be in alignment with your dreams and with your hopes and with your plans, you will not crash out. You will be able to survive. So this basically, the purpose of the documentary is not for us to have empathy or sympathy for Betty Broderick, okay? At the same time, it's not for us to have empathy and sympathy for Dan Broderick. Now, even though his life was taken senselessly, his actions still played a part in Betty resorting to the extreme in what she did. At the end of the day, our actions affect people. And you don't get to choose how people respond to how your actions affect them. Okay, some people can take the L and keep it moving. Others will crash out, and I would tell women the same thing. You have to be careful in marriages with men, using them, taking advantage of them, because if a man finds out you're using them, you're lying to them, you manipulated them to get what you want, it could have very well, the shoe could have been on the other foot. Well, he could have crashed out, just knowing that Betty was not going to accept him leaving her. You get what I'm saying? So Dan had a lot of money. He could have hired a hitman. He could have hired anybody to take her out too now. A lot of people don't think about stuff like that. But again, I don't condone violence. I just want us to focus on the things that got to this point, because it's a lot of women that are doing what Betty Broderick did. And you have to be in reality if you are one of those women. Okay, so the vlog is not to glorify Betty Broderick or justify her murdering Dan. It is to show married women that devotion without self-preservation is dangerous. You can love your husband, support his dreams, raise children, and build a home, but you still need an identity, purpose, skills, confidence, and emotional stability outside of marriage. Betty believed that because she stayed through the struggle years, Dan would honor that loyalty forever. Okay? Instead, the marriage broke down. He built a new life with another woman, and Betty spiraled into rage, humiliation, and destruction. That does not excuse what she did, but it does reveal the danger of losing yourself inside a role. So, of course, we got to do our scriptures, y'all. So let's get to our scriptures. Okay. Scriptures, starting with Proverbs chapter 31, verse 25. She is clothed with strength and dignity. She can laugh at the days to come. Meaning, a woman should never be so emotionally, mentally, or financially unprepared that the future destroys her when a relationship changes. Betty's story shows what can happen when a woman is not emotionally positioned to face life beyond marriage. When a wife is so sure of herself and so sure of her husband and so sure of her future because of all she sacrificed, that's basically a dangerous mindset to have, because if you're that certain only for things to go different from what you had prepared in mind, you can definitely lose your sanity. Not being prepared for the what ifs. What if this doesn't work? What if he decides to, make other decisions without me, even though I'm the one who helped him start or build this legacy. You got to be prepared because people have the right to disappoint you. And I tell my clients this in my classes that I instruct, that people have the right to disappoint you. People have the right to let you down, and you have to always leave room for people to disappoint you. Putting folks on the pedestal like, oh, that can never happen to me. He would never do that to me. She would never do that to me. You set yourself up for a recipe of disaster, thinking that no one can ever wrong you. Okay? All of us are capable of being wronged in some shape or form, because guess what? You yourself, like me, we have wronged others. We have not always been supportive. We have not always been caring, loving, and giving. And anybody who says I've always been loving and caring, they lie. Because we've all at some point in time fumbled and dropped the ball and didn't always do our part. And we just have to face the reality of that, okay? Okay, had a brief, not that one. Had a brief interruption, y'all. So anyway, getting back to the documentary at hand, right? Left off at Proverbs 31. So now we go to our next scripture, okay? Jeremiah chapter 17, verse 5. It says, "Cursed is the one who trusts in man, who draws strength from mere flesh." In other words, this does not mean to never marry. Okay? It does not make another human being your God. And that's what it basically means. It means don't make another human being your God, your security, your identity, or your source of worth. Betty's downfall reflects what can happen when a woman leans too heavily on a man's presence for her emotional survival. Let me tell you something, honey. Some of these husbands, they will set you up and will let you praise them and give them all the glory and worship service. And meanwhile, while you're giving them this standing ovation, they are already plotting. They are already making plans of their own. They got an agenda. And they will sit up there and let you do all of this praising them and defending them. And then yet they will turn around and throw egg in your face. Yes, the very woman who supports them and defends them, those are the ones who they do in. Those are the ones who they end up hurting the most. So you have to be mindful sometimes when you do make these men your God and you put them all the way up there, okay? Next one is Philippians chapter 4, verses 11 through 13. "I've learned to be content whatever the circumstances. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me." This lesson is emotional and spiritual stability, y'all. Life changes. People betray. Roles shift. A woman must develop an identity and strength that can survive disappointment without collapsing into obsession, revenge, or self-destruction. So you always have to expect the unexpected. Even with these married men, you can never sit up there and think, oh, I know him. I've been with my husband since high school. He would never do that. We got too much to lose. When a man has his mind made up that he wants to do other things, he could become very selfish. And he's not going to think about, oh, well, everything she did for me, I really don't want to do that. In their mind, after a while, they'll have this attitude of entitlement that you chose to do it for them, that you chose to sacrifice. And then some of them are so arrogant, they'll look at it like this: well, you were my wife, so even though I plan on leaving your ass, you was doing what you were supposed to do anyway. You have some narcissistic ninjas who think like this. They don't feel bad. They've already made it up in their mind that they are right for going about things the way they plan on going about it. Okay? So let's discuss some of the background. Okay? Well, why was loyalty so central to her? So keep in mind, Betty, whose real name is Elizabeth Ann Besgelia, in 1947, and grew up a Roman Catholic family in suburban New York with 5 siblings. She attended Catholic schools and later graduated from the College of Mount St. Vincent, a Catholic women's college. Reporting on this case constantly describes her as the daughter of a successful New York builder contractor and as someone raised in a sheltered traditional environment. The reason this information is important, y'all, is because it helps examine why marriage, motherhood, respectability, and being a supportive wife was central to how she saw herself. That religious and family background is important for your analysis. Betty did not appear to intermatch with a modern keep your identity first framework. She came from a more traditional model. The wife supports, the husband builds, the family unit is the goal, and sacrifice is supposed to pay off. By Betty's own description, that was the bargain. She provided the image, children, entertaining, and home life, while Dan provided status and money. That mindset can create devotion, but it can also create devastation if the marriage later becomes betrayal. Okay, so keep in mind, Betty came from a background where, in a religious sense, it was programmed into her genetics that men are to lead and that a woman is supposed to basically give her all in all to her husband, to her family. She's supposed to be a support system. So you have a lot of women that tolerate way more than they should, and while you have other women on the outside that judge it like, girl, I got my own mind, I'm not about to make my life about just no man. Well, it all depends on that woman's upbringing. Some of us were raised in religions or cults, whatever you want to call it, that basically has brainwashed a lot of women into thinking that a man should always be honored, a man should always be respected, a man should always lead, even if he's not good at leadership abilities, even if he allows his flesh to lead him instead of discretion and discernment. So all of that played a role into why Betty was so headstrong and being a wife and living up to that family American dream. She was raised in a system that required that, and a lot of women are dealing with way more than they should because of the religious requirements that are expected of them as wives. If not religion, some women were just raised in households where it was tradition to see their mother always cater to their father, even though dad was abusive, emotionally, physically, mentally, or whatever. Some women as little girls were raised in households where whatever that man said goes. The reason I know is because I know a couple of women that were raised in a household in which the mother was overly submissive. And they seen a father be mean, be cruel, be disrespectful. But no matter what, they've seen their mothers subject themselves to slavery versus submission. And there's a difference between that. Slavery, a woman had no say-so. It was all about being a servant to her husband. She had to give her husband her mind, her body, her spirit, while he gave very little in return. Now, a woman who is submissive, she's submissive because she's catering to her husband because he takes care of her, he supports her, he gives her love, he gives her the treatment that a husband should be giving his wife. So therefore, because of the fact that he does not just see himself as a leader, but he also equally values her the way she values him, she does not mind being submissive and catering to him, because there is that equal exchange, that love that's being reciprocated from both ends. But a woman who's in slavery mode, she just gives while the man just takes. Okay, so Betty was raised in that environment, y'all. And if any of you are raised in that environment, keep in mind that mindset is the very thing that can hinder you in the long run, because you were raised to think that it is acceptable to subject yourself to slavery in a marriage. Okay, Slavery and loyalty is not the same thing, okay? Anyhow, so how did Betty and Dan meet? Because we also got to understand his background as well. So Betty met Dan in 1965 during a football weekend at Notre Dame. Notre Dame. Notre Dame is one of them prestigious universities or whatever, okay? She was young and by later accounts not initially impressed by him. Now keep in mind, just to show y'all, Betty was not feeling Dan at all, okay? Dan was a square, okay? Dan was not her initial type of guy. That she wasn't even into him like that, you know, but he just kept pursuing her. Dan is very aggressive, you know, he knows how to say the right things to get what he wants, you know, and nevertheless, he kept pursuing her to the point that she ended up giving in. And that's why you see on the thumbnail, you can kind of see Dan was a square, a lame, had no looks, you know, just a typical nerdy dude, right? And Betty was drop dead gorgeous. You know, she was this pretty blonde, green-eyed, you know what I mean? She was the cat's meat out back in the day, okay? So any man would have been, you know, honored to have Betty, you know, because she was a very beautiful woman. And that's why he pursued Betty, because of how beautiful she was. Okay? So one Los Angeles Times account stated he seemed like a nerd, but Dan kept pursuing her through letters, telegrams, and persistence, because Dan is the man who will stop at nothing to get what he wants. Betty later said he asked her to marry him repeatedly over several years. This is one of the strongest lessons for women. A man pursuing you hard does not guarantee permanent loyalty. Persistence can win access. It does not prove character. It does not promise integrity years later. Dan's early pursuit can be used as a lesson and a warning that, you know, a man can want you badly, but it's not the same as he will actually honor you for life. You have some men who will run you down to be with you, to court you. And see, women, we think about stuff like this, and that's why when a man folds on you and goes a different way, it's really mind-boggling, because it's like, I wasn't even feeling this guy. I wasn't even into him. And the fact that I gave in, and that's why sometimes when a man pursues you too hardly, sometimes it can be a red flag, not all the time, but sometimes, because you have some guys that are just aggressive because they like to conquer, not because they really want something solid. It's all about stroking their ego, and it's all about making them feel powerful in a sense, right? So this is sometimes why you shouldn't think because a man chases you and runs you down that he's going to always be faithful. He's going to always be loyal because, oh, he wanted me. He ran after me. He chased me. Not necessarily. Now, if we talk about Dan's background, Dan came from a strict Irish Catholic family in Pittsburgh and was the oldest of 9 children. He graduated from Notre Dame, attended Cornell Medical School, later went to Harvard Law School, and eventually became a successful San Diego medical malpractice attorney. Contemporary reporting described him as extremely ambitious, highly intelligent, image conscious, and materially driven. Okay. One trial article even stated where he wrote that reaching massive material wealth would make him more loving and lovable. Okay. See, the reason this information is very important because it gives you a strong psychological angle about Dan. Dan was not just successful, he was deeply status driven. So status meant everything to Dan. Image meant everything to Dan. Betty seems to have interrupted their marriage as a lifelong partnership built through sacrifice. Dan appears to have increasingly viewed life through achievement, reinvention, and control. That mismatch matters. You know, we're seeing the difference in that. Betty was more driven by a family, unit, by a family structure. And Dan's perception was more built off of fortune, achievement, and control. One spouse may be building a covenant mindset while the other one is building a personal empire. Now think about all of that, because it's going to tie into how all of this ultimately ends up unfolding. So, in initial beginning, Betty sacrificed a lot while Danny went to law school and while he also went to medical school. And in the process of that, Betty was the homemaker. Betty was the one making all of the money, while Dan was the one going to these two different schools. You know, anybody who's been in college or is in college, that takes a lot of time, a lot of hours, a lot of dedication. Okay, so basically, the couple, had married in April 1969. During Dan's medical and law school years, Betty supported the household in various ways while raising children, and the family later moved to San Diego, where Dan's medical malpractice career took off. By the early 1980s, they had become prominent in La Jolla social circles with 4 children and a visibly affluent lifestyle. This is another key point, okay? When a woman has poured years into supporting a man's ascent, she may feel entitled not just to the lifestyle, but to the loyalty. And emotionally, many women tell themselves, I was there when he had nothing, so surely I'm safe. Betty's case shows that many women confuse investment with security. They are not the same thing. So keep in mind, during that time, that was a real struggle season. While Dan was, being ambitious, being driven, going to school, Betty had to hold down the fort. Okay. But the first oldest daughter, I believe she had, Kim, they were struggling so bad that they didn't even have a crib. Kim, she had to put a blanket inside one of the drawers and make that a crib for Kim. So, for her first child. So, Betty did a whole lot of straining. And she had to hold down the fort doing Tupperware parties. She became an Avon lady. You name it. She did a little bit of everything. She was the one making the money. Okay? While Dan should have been making their future. Okay? So, this is the deadly... excuse me. This is the harsh reality of a woman who has poured so much into a man. You was with him when y'all was eating ramen noodles. You was with him while he went to school and you kept the kids. While you sacrificed, you did everything. Okay? Because in your mind, you thinking eventually it's going to pay off. And that's what Betty thought. Betty said, let me deal with the BS. Let me deal with the bull crap. I will deal with eating ramen noodles. I will deal with eating tuna out the can. Taking tuna out the can, warming it up in the microwave, anything to hold down the home front so that she makes it comfortable for Dan to be able to get through medical and law school. That way, in the long run, she's looking at the long run, we'll both be able to benefit from this, okay? So, this is what ultimately ends up happening, okay? So, as time went on, Dan, of course, being an ambitious man that he is, he succeeded law school and medical school. Okay? So now he has arrived. Betty's thinking all of the struggling, all of the raising the kids by myself, all the Tupperware parties, all the selling Avon, all of this, there was no online back then. So you had to go door to door to make sales and stuff like that. So she's thinking, yes, now we have arrived. My kids are bigger now. At this point, Dan is making money. So they move into the nice upper echelon neighborhood. Okay, they move into the neighborhood. Now, they're living in the same residence amongst the wealthy. So now Dan is seeing all of his accomplishments unfold right before his eyes. Now he's at this point in his life where, wow, look what I have done for us to get to where we are. So slowly but surely, he's kind of forgetting that, yeah, even though you went to school, you did all of reading all the books, and you were the one who physically had to sit in the classes. Back then there was no online classes. In his mind, he's starting to kind of smell himself. He's popping his own collar, like, yeah, we're good now. So at this point, he feels like he's gotten them to this point to where now they could finally enjoy the fruits of their labor. So at this point in time, they move into a big, beautiful home. At this point, they have bonded with the community. They are this power couple, okay? Dan and Betty, they are this power couple, okay? So they have this utmost respect. Dan is this big time, powerful attorney. He has attorney friends. All of his attorney friends, they are married to women, because back then, men, that was something men honored, to have a career, to have a wife, to have a family. So even in that type of socialite, in that circle, all the attorneys had wives. You get what I'm saying? So she even became friends with his attorneys' wives. So they're building this life. Everything is pretty much working out in their favor, and Betty's looking at it like, yes, we finally arrived. They got their kids in these upper echelon private schools. Dan's sons are in soccer. Betty is being a soccer mom, carpooling. And she's just loving her life right now, because she's feeling like we have arrived. We are here. We can finally enjoy everything and just be a family. Be a husband and a wife and enjoy this life, and let's just raise our children and ride off into the sunset. Well, there's a saying, right? And I want to make sure I say it correctly. There's a saying that a woman's loyalty is tested when a man has nothing, and a man's loyalty is tested when he has everything. And I couldn't have been further from the truth, because you start to see the real size of a man once he becomes successful. Now, you have some men who become successful, but they stay with the woman who struggled with them in the midst of that struggle. LL Cool J did it. Denzel Washington did it. I mean, we see all of these successful men, and behind every successful man has been a successful woman. Denzel Washington even said he was so broke he couldn't even pay for the first meal. His wife Pauletta paid for their first meal. Okay, so you have a lot of these groupies that will pop up out of thin air, swearing these men had it all together, and the whole time it was the woman in the background. Ariana knows that now more than anybody. But anyway, so this what ends up happening. He opens his law firm, okay, and with that, you have to start hiring people to help you to be able to operate your business. Okay, so Betty, being that she already had her hands tied, being a mom, being a soccer mom, dropping her daughters off the ballerina recital, she already had her hands still full being a supportive wife. So Dan starts hiring a team, and originally some of the women he had hired were older women, who he had to do secretary duties and things of that nature and stuff like that. Okay, but as time went on and Dan's business continued to boom, his law enforcement, I'm saying law enforcement, I mean, his law firm continued to progress and things ended up going well for him. That is when this pretty young tenderoni, blonde, I don't know if I want to say bimbo, but they called them bimbos back in the day. But anyway, in comes 𝓜𝓸𝓬𝓱𝓪'𝓼, which is this woman that you see right here. Okay. All right. She applied to the law firm, and of course she was just there temporarily. Okay, she just was supposed to be there temporarily. from my understanding, she really didn't have no secretarial skills like that. She just did basic stuff like answer the phone. From what I was told from several sources, she was not secretary material. She really couldn't type well. She really couldn't spell well. I mean, she wasn't like a total dummy, but she just was somebody that Dan had no business hiring as a secretary. She was not fit. She was not qualified. But nevertheless, he hired her. Okay? And when he hired her, things in that law firm went from professional to personal. Okay? Again, she just was supposed to be temporary. But being that Dan is a man of image, he just went simply off of what she looked like. She didn't care that she didn't have the brains or she didn't have the smarts of a secretary. All he knew was, here it is. This is a new version of Betty Broderick. She's blonde, young, blue eyes, beautiful, looking just like the very first time he met Betty Broderick. Okay? So, nobody's not slow or dumb. People in a law firm office, the employees, they're figuring out something is going on. Okay? Linda and Dan, they start getting real comfortable. And most people, when they start smashing, they don't pay attention to the room. They start getting comfortable. And they don't even care that other people are noticing something ain't wrong. Now, keep in mind, the other women who have been working for Dan for quite some time, they are older. And they are reading the room. And they are full aware that Dan, their boss, whom they know is married, because keep in mind, everybody knew Dan was married and then everybody knew Betty. So imagine if you're working for a well-known, powerful man who you know was married, but you seeing him constantly leave the office with this young secretary. Rumors were spreading. People looking left and right like, oh, he's smashing old girl. Ain't no way. So, it was his birthday. Betty decides, being a wife, I'm going to go to my husband's business and his law firm, and I want to treat him out, surprise him, take him for lunch on his birthday, do something nice for him. So Betty pulls up there, okay, in that expensive car, enters into the law firm, because mind you, everybody knows Betty. Security don't stop her and check her. No, everybody knows you do not question Miss Broderick. Okay, so she walks into the establishment and she notices as soon as she entered Dan's office, there was a bunch of balloons. There was a cake that you can tell been sliced and been cut. Like, okay, who the hell was he celebrating his birthday with, where he couldn't call me, he couldn't tell me, he didn't say nothing to me like, babe, my office, surprised me with a birthday party. He didn't say no words about it, right? Not only he didn't say anything about it, Dan was not there. Where the hell could you be on your birthday? Other than your ass is not in this office. I'm coming up here to see you, to celebrate with you on your birthday, and you're not here. So like any other woman, she asks one of the older lady secretaries, like, hey, what's going on? Where is Dan? And of course, the receptionist says, he's out with Linda. And Betty's like, are you freaking serious? He's out with who on his birthday? This is supposed to be something only me and him are supposed to be sharing together. Okay? So, anyway, that pissed off. What woman wouldn't be pissed? Okay? Now, keep in mind, not only is this affecting his marriage, the other women in the office are starting to feel some type of way because Dan, his nose is so wide open for Linda, okay, the Jezebel, that he is starting to treat the other women in his law firm like they're not important. Now, keep in mind, he hired Linda as a secretary, and like I told y'all, she couldn't type a goddamn thing, not from what I read in the sources, okay? So the older women in there who are experienced and who do know how to do their job is making them feel some type of way. Imagine you working for this man for 30, 40 something years. You've always been his ride or die secretary. You've always been professional. You've always done his paperwork. And here it is. He hires a young bimbo and decides to make her secretary, and you know this bitch ain't even typing, she ain't doing nothing. And you find out he's paying her more than he's paying you. You the one doing the footwork. You the one making his coffee in the morning. You the one that's drawing up all his paperwork for his meetings and his conferences and all of this other stuff and everything else. So, even the older secretaries, they start feeling some type of way. And one of them, who had been ride or die for him and knowing Betty, she told him, I can't do this anymore. I've been working all these years for you. I've been putting in work. And here it is. You hire this young broad and who can't even damn open a dictionary. Back then they had dictionaries, y'all. There was no spell check, okay? And you're not paying me, so I'm out. You know, older women, we don't play about our goddamn bread. Once you start messing up our bread and playing with us, and you paying somebody more than you paying us, and we know we've been dedicated, that lady said, I'm out. So it's getting to the point now where Dan's fuckery is slowly but surely making other people feel some type of way because he's become so egotistical, he's not even goddamn being careful about who's noticing and who's paying attention. So, Betty gets wind of it. Okay? Not to mention, what really stood out was when he brought that red Corvette. Now, this was not Dan's usual thing. Now, keep in mind, at first, Betty was okay with him hiring a secretary, right? She's not thinking he's hiring extra help because the law firm is getting bigger now. It's too much for him to handle. So she's thinking that he's hiring extra help. Now we can spend more time together. Now it's just me and him. Now it's just us. You know, I don't have to wait on a schedule. Waiting for Dan. I don't have to schedule an appointment with Dan to spend time with me and his kids. He can spend time with us now. Well, he didn't hire that secretary so that they could spend time with his wife, with Betty. He hired that secretary for his own personal agenda. So what ended up happening was, like, a lot of these guys, when they start messing around, their patterns change. They're not smart about it as much. They get sloppy. But when he brought that red Corvette, that really stood out like a sore thumb. Guess who convinced him to get the red Corvette? Well, it was Linda. Because he kept going out with Linda. They're doing lunches together. So he kept saying for the longest, he's being transparent with Linda, saying, hey, you know, I really want to get a red Corvette because at this time it's past professional. It done got personal. He's opening up to Linda. He's telling her things he wants to do, sharing shit with Linda that he should have been sharing with Betty. Okay, so he's up there, yeah, babe, you know, I really want to get this red Corvette. And Linda not giving a shit because she's looking at the fact he got all this money, he got all this power. Yeah, you should go for it. Get you a red Corvette. I think you would actually look good in it. I think it would look good on you. Now, keep in mind, Dan has some looks at this point in time. He's not looking like Harry Potter anymore. He done went from a ugly duckling to a handsome swan. Okay? So, at this point, he's feeling himself because he got success and he got some looks now. So, now Linda is really pumping him up, y'all, and telling him, yeah, get the red Corvette. Not telling Brady anything. He goes and purchases the red Corvette and decides to come home with it out the blue. Betty said, oh, hell no. This ninja done went to celebrate his birthdays without me. Now he's purchasing cars and making investments without me. And she asks him, Dan, what all of a sudden just sparked you to want to get a Corvette? He's up here lying like most cheating husbands do. Oh, you know, babe, I just saw you Bets. He will call her Bets. He will call her by her nickname a lot. According to what friends and several sources. Oh, Bets. You know, I decided, why not? You know, we worked so hard. We done got to this point, you know, this and that. So he buys the red Corvette. And like I stated, at this point, things start getting really out of hand. She's starting to notice he's changing. He's smelling himself and things like that. and she confronted him, you know, seeing all these different things he's doing. Are you having an affair? Damn, what is going on? You're changing. You're doing things you normally don't do. You on the phone, back then they had cordless phones. There was no cell phones. So he just was laughing it up and tooting it up. And Betty is just starting to notice this ninja is like on us. He's doing something he don't need to be doing. And she's like, who you on the phone with? Oh, you know, that was my secretary. You know, I'm just explaining to her how I thank her for doing such a wonderful job today. So she has confronted him because she's seeing all kind of stuff adding up. And at this point, she starts crashing out. Because he's steady telling her, I'm not doing anything. Nothing is going on. Nothing is going wrong as secretary. And she says, no, Dan, you're lying. It's not adding up. You know, it's just too much stuff going on. So, of course, she crashes out. She gets upset. And she takes some of his clothes and throws them in the lawn and sets them on fire. And I think at this point, she just wants to get his attention. She just wants him to realize, whatever you're doing, stop it. You're hurting me. I know something is going on. And at this point, she's not being violent towards him, but she's doing a lot of crashing out episodes because she just wants him to be honest. He assures her nothing is going on. I love you. I'm going to be with you. Nothing is wrong. We're not having trouble in the marriage, nothing like that. So she calms down thinking, okay, maybe it's me. Maybe I'm just losing my goddamn mind. Okay, so she kind of backs down. Okay, after that, the marriage continues to go on, but it's obvious that it's a lot of tension going on. When a man starts giving himself to another woman, it changes the spirit in the marriage. It changes the vibe of the household. No matter how much he spends money on you, no matter how much he does nice things for you, and he buys Betty a nice ring for Christmas, and he's still performing. They still going on trips and stuff like that. Because at this point, Dan think everything is cool. He done got Betty to calm down. Meanwhile, he's still smashing Linda, so he's able to wear both hats until he decides what he wants to do. And of course, Linda, because she's already feeling, Betty, because she's already feeling all type of things are not adding up. He buys a ring that she feels was a disrespectful token because him and her being together so long, I guess, I don't know if it was one of those things where you should know what kind of ring I want. At this point, you probably just giving me any goddamn thing so I can shut the hell up. So she crashes out. She gets mad about that. Now, keep in mind, we know it's not just about that ring. It's about several things. And him not getting her the ring that she really wanted, that just added more fuel to the fire. Okay, so what Dan does, he flips the script. Oh, I'm around here still doing nice things for you. We're going on trips. We're doing things and you're still in your feelings. And Betty's like, nah, you just giving me whatever. And you're not giving me what I really want, what I really need. And then he flips the script. Well, that's because I realize I can't make you happy. It's not even about what I'm doing anymore. I just think you're not happy with me. So I think anything that I do, you're going to find fault in it. So at this point, he's doing reverse psychology. Okay, I'm doing everything right, yet you're still complaining. And Betty looking at it like, nah, you doing that half-ass BS just so you can make it look like you're doing everything right, and you're not. So anybody could take it either or. Anybody probably would look at it like, Betty's just being ungrateful. And somebody else may look at it like, no, Dan is setting the stage. You know what I mean? So it just all kind of depends, right? So finally, it gets to a breaking point to where Dan can no longer pretend. Okay? So he comes to her and basically initiates a divorce. Okay? Now, keep in mind, his affair with Linda began around 1983. And he kept denying it, kept lying about it now. Okay? She had worked as his legal assistant. Betty later testified she felt he lied to her repeatedly about the relationship, which he did. Dan moved out in 1985. He already was setting the stage, y'all, and filed for divorce later that year. We talking about y'all, him and Linda him and Betty been married every bit of, let me make sure I got my dates right. All right. How long have Dan and Betty been married? Okay. Just want to make sure I know about that. So 16 years from their wedding. 16 years. And you can just all of a sudden you finding everything wrong. You can't find nothing right out of 16 years. Okay. So he moved out, and keep in mind it's been 16 years, and he filed a divorce later that year. He didn't waste no time in filing that divorce, y'all. Now, y'all, let's kind of park it right here, right quick, right? Because I think it's imperative that we discuss this, because this part is the turning point, right? I want us to go into how Dan started behaving once he made it official with Linda. Once they actually made that step to where now he no longer has to hide it. It's no longer a secret. At this point, the divorce is in full fruition. It's going. And while it's going, Dan has become more bold. He has become more comfortable. He quickly moved Linda into his life full time, okay? He's no longer hiding it at this point. He began publicly presenting Linda as his partner even before the divorce was finalized, okay? All right, so at this point, Linda is taking the place of Betty. Not just taking a place as far as transitioning into becoming his wife, but she has taken Betty's life, meaning now Betty is no longer part of that socialite that her and Dan had together. Okay, so what that means is this, ladies. Betty's friends are now becoming Linda's friends. As I mentioned earlier, right? Part of being in a socialite is when you marry a lawyer, you become friends with the lawyer's wives. Well, what happened was Betty was evicted from the socialite, y'all, when Dan decided to move on and basically bring Linda in as he pushed Betty out. Well, what happens is all of the socialites automatically start inviting and accepting Linda as the new socialite wife, basically, right? Everything Betty had built, this fort she built around the marriage, becoming a part of the socialite, being accepted as like a stepford wife, all of that has been stripped from her now at this point in time. Okay. It's like getting a trophy, and after you done ran the whole finish line, after you done ran the whole race, right? Only to get to the end, and as they're giving you your trophy, they snatch it from you and give it to somebody else who only had to just stand there at the damn race. Ain't ran shit, ain't did shit, just basically was able to collect the goddamn trophy. Okay? And that's what Linda did. Like, yeah, give me that trophy, bitch. I know you ran, and you ran a race, and you was the one who had to put in all the footwork, but now it is mine. Okay, so keep in mind the divorce has not quite finalized and set in. So at this point in time, Betty is still feeling like a part of this life still belongs to her, because there's no divorce that has finalized and officially taken place. Okay, Dan, being the egotistical dude that he is, he flaunts Linda all over the place, letting it be known, this is my new life. This is my new wife. I am making everything official with Linda. Okay. Now keep in mind, he married Linda in 1989, shortly after the divorce was finalized. So the ink wasn't even dry on the divorce papers, and Dan already made it his business, y'all. So if he was stunting before the divorce, you could imagine how he started stunting and flexing Linda after the divorce. So y'all, Betty's socialite, bougie ass friends, girls, they basically abandoned her. She was no longer invited to the socialite tea parties. A lot of these rich women is bougie as hell. And, they would get together and do these like tea and wine and, all of these little like first wives conference meetings or whatever. Linda didn't get any more invites, y'all. A matter of fact, no, not Linda. I keep getting them mixed up. Betty did not get any more invites. In fact, the whole community shunned Betty. It's like when Dan walked, everything that Betty was a part of, it walked right along with her. Okay, now y'all, please make sure y'all hit the like button. This documentary is going to be pretty long, so brace yourself. You might have to just watch some of it and then come back and watch the rest. So nobody in the comment section come on with, this thing is too long. Why you taking so long? Because it's a whole lot to be uncovered. And I don't want to have to come back and do a part 2. So I'm trying to get it all in, y'all. Okay, so her friends started like acting bougie. Like she would run into them in the grocery store. Keep in mind, she still lives in the area, not the house anymore, but she's still traveling. She's around. She's running into these people. And listen, they acting like they never even met Betty. Okay? They're being different for her because keep in mind, everybody at this point in time, they still got their man. They still got their marriages. They still got their husbands. And that's what these married women do. They cool with you as long as you still have your husband. But once your husband divorced you, you're not part of the first wives' lives, okay? You're no longer a part of that system. Now, keep in mind, Betty did have one homegirl who experienced the same exact thing. She also got evicted when her loyal husband got rid of her. So, Betty did have one homegirl. She did have one friend that was in the same boat with her that resonated with her pain. So Betty and her friend, they became pretty close. You know what I mean? Cause they both was trauma bonding. Okay. Her friend, I'm gonna just say, Kathy. Okay. So Kathy also got booted from her billionaire bae, her billionaire husband. Okay. So both of them started becoming friends, right? Because she was outcasted too. So they just became friends, being that Betty and Katie was able, and Kathy or whatever, was able to relate to each other a lot more. Okay, so Linda is everywhere, y'all. Not having no regards, not feeling bad, no remorse, no empathy, no sympathy. Honey, she was all over the place. Like, she just always belonged there, okay? So, Betty didn't experience a gradual breakup. She experienced replacement. So, in other words, Dan did not waste no time. Soon as out with the old, in with the new. That psychological impact is huge. It creates feelings of being erased, not just left. Okay? So, basically, listen, y'all. Dan was trying to erase Betty's existence like she never ever happened. Okay? That's what he was on. All right? When I say no grease, just straight raw, okay? No easy lubrication at all. Okay? So when Dan went left, he went all the way left. Okay? All right? So, at this point, Betty was not simply just dealing with a heartbreak. She was dealing with replacement, humiliation, powerlessness, aging, okay, her looks, status loss, family disruption, and the collapse of the identity she had built around being the wife of Dan Broderick. That combination can produce obsession in people who never had no inner life outside of their marriage. Again, that explains the spiral. It doesn't justify the murders. Okay? All right, so going back, I want us to go back to this Dan and Linda thing, y'all. So after leaving, Dan began tightening control financially. He cut off and restricted Betty's access to money. So When the honey gone, the money gone. So now at this point in time, Dan is feeling really safe, really secure. He's gotten even bigger for his britches. Now that he moved Betty out of his home, out of their home, and out of his life, now this has given him more motivation to up the ante and really show his ass. So he allegedly canceled credit cards. Hit the like button, by the way, if you haven't already. Please hit the likes. If any of my mods are here, I appreciate y'all. Thank you. He controls spousal support timing and amounts. He used his legal expertise to drag out court proceedings. Keep in mind, Dan was not only being an a-hole, an ass or whatever, but keep in mind, the man had acknowledged, he knew as a lawyer what he could do. Keep in mind, Betty didn't know what Dan knew, okay? Dan was the one who went to school. Dan who studied law. Dan knew it all, okay? All right? Not only that, Dan had a lot of power in that town. You know what I mean? He had a lot of power, a lot of leverage. Everybody knew who Dan was, you feel me? And nobody would come to Linda's defense. Nobody would like try to help her, give her advice. Matter of fact, during the divorce, every lawyer she tried to get in that town, baby, it was like, hell no, we not taking that case. Why? Because everybody knew Dan, and Dan was the man with the master plan. Nobody was not about to challenge Big Dan, okay? Dan had a lot of clout, had a lot of pull. He had a lot of things that Betty did not have, and he knew that. He knew that, okay? He knew he was a force to be reckoned with, okay? So keep in mind, in that town, in that community, nobody wanted to help Betty challenge Dan. Nobody was not going to go there and help her. So every lawyer she tried to get in that town, nobody would take the case. So she did end up getting a lawyer from somewhere else, from a whole nother city, I guess. I just know he wasn't from there. Because everybody knew Dan. So she had to get somebody who did not know Dan personally like that. Okay. So that's what she had to do. Okay, he was a prominent local attorney. And not only that, he was serving as the president of the San Diego Bar Association. So, even Betty stated that Dan made it extremely difficult for her to find an attorney willing to represent her, okay? That put her at a disadvantage. He used a lot of legal influence to win sole custody of the children, which that ended up happening. He sold the house against their wishes and cheated her rightful share of her income. So basically, Dan was able to give her crumbs and bits and pieces of what he wanted to give her. Now, keep in mind, when Betty started crashing out every time she tried to make moves and she was basically cock blocked or whatever, every time, Betty would react and respond, in an angry way. Do you not know he would deduct money from out of the alimony, out of what he was agreeing to pay her anytime she spazzed out? So if she called him and she would complain about, hey, I tried to pick up the kids today and you was not there. You was not there to schedule time that you said you was going to bring the kids. Anytime she made a complaint, this ninja was deducting money out of her alimony. And he would threaten her and tell her, hey, if you spaz out or if you come over here unannounced, anything, I'm going to take $1,000. I'm going to take $500 if you breathe wrong. I'm going to take $1,000 if you park in front of my porch instead of in front of my driveway. Anything he could come up with, he was pounding her to the pavement, y'all. Okay? All right, so he was taking nasty to a whole nother level. So he was running the money. Now keep in mind, he's doing all of this while he's with Linda. The knife is still in Betty's back, and on top of that, he keeps piercing the knife even more, on top of doing extra stuff, on top of the fact that he's all over town with this new woman. So this left Betty feeling financially deprived despite his wealth, dependent on a system he controlled. Again, Dan had a lot of power. Nobody was not going to go up against Dan. They were not going to do it. Okay. And all of this just continued to just make things just more challenging, just more difficult, you know what I mean? And it just continued to just cause Betty to spiral because she felt defeated. No lawyer want to talk to you. Let me tell you something. This dude has so much power. How about even when she went to the police department, they wouldn't do nothing either. Dan had clout with the damn police departments. Okay. Now keep in mind, the neighborhood in the community in which they were living in San Diego, California at the time, was known as the Martin Hills neighborhood. That's where people with a lot of money, wealthy, well-off echelons lived at. Resided. Okay. And their home was located at 1041 Cypress Avenue in that neighborhood. So they was among the wealthy. And again, he booted Betty and moved Linda right in. Okay. So this situation, this part, not being able to get any support, not being able to have anybody help her with a case, going to the police department where they laughing at her or they taking reports and not following them. This is a form of post-separation abuse, using finances in the legal system. And Dan did all of that. Okay, now, Dan didn't just leave. He weaponized the court system. Now, to add insult to injury, he filed motions and responses that increased her legal costs. Knowing she didn't have the money, knowing she didn't have the power and the clout that he had. So he did that intentionally because he knew she didn't have the money to fight him. He used delays and strategy to exhaust her emotionally and financially. So he kept, what he was trying to do, he was trying to wear her down. Every time she filed in court, he would get the court date pushed back. Keep in mind, Dan is a lawyer, which means he had a relationship with the judges, with the district attorneys. You know, all of them have an alliance, you feel me? And Betty was not part of that allowance, you know. So he was intentionally just doing a lot of things to make her exhausted. You know, she going to the lawyer, sorry, nothing we can do. Going to the judge, sorry, nothing we can do. We're going to have to wait. We're going to have to give it some time. You know, he basically was trying to wear her out. Okay. So she just give in. Don't buck the system. And when you're dealing with a man that's wealthy, basically 9 times out of 10, he's going to get his way one way or another. That's why you have to be careful going after men with money. We're going to talk about it another time too. He positioned himself as a calm, successful professional. So while Betty was looking like this crazed maniac because she's feeling defeated, she's feeling powerless, like she's not being heard, Dan was cool, calm, and collective because he was being what was called a narcissist. That's what narcissists do. They know how to throw the rock and hide in the hand. And I believe the reason he was so calm and easygoing because he just knew Betty did not have the money. She didn't have the sources. She didn't have the connections that he had. And that's what kept him so calm because he just knew no matter what, he was going to win. Okay. He painted Betty as unstable and irrational. And a lot of times when women, we go through pain, we go through hurt. And if we don't get a grip on those emotions, it comes off as we are unstable and we are crazy. He knew how to win legally, not necessarily how to resolve peacefully. Okay. So going more into the Linda thing, right? While Betty was struggling, Dan and Linda lived in a luxurious La Jolla home. They maintained a high-status social life. He continued building his career in wealth. Linda stepped into the role Betty once had. OMG. Linda became his wife, social partner, and public image support. This created a painful contrast because Betty was struggling, isolated, fighting in court, while Linda, on the other hand, was living the rewarded version of Betty's former life. Okay. Next, the emotional provocation and psychological impact. There were ongoing tensions that escalated things. Betty made frequent angry phone calls, So because of those calls and her lashing out, Dan allegedly changed numbers repeatedly. He limited communication. He refused direct emotional engagement, keeping things legal and distant. Important nuance, right? Dan stayed controlled and calculated. He played it smooth. Okay? All right. He was very demonic in his deeds, but at the same time he was very strategic. Betty became emotionally reactive and explosive. Okay, the contrast hurt her in court and strengthened his position. So because he was doing all of these things to cause her to lash out, keep in mind he knows Betty, he's been with her for a long time. And because Betty did not think logically, she think emotionally, he used that to his advantage, and it actually made him look good legally. Okay, now the narrative control. Dan was very intentional about how the story looked. He presented himself as rational, successful, victimized by Betty's behavior, and Betty was increasingly portrayed as obsessive, harassing, unstable. Once that narrative stuck, it influenced the judges, the attorneys, and the public perception. Now, the breaker point. All of this combined led to years of legal battles, emotional deterioration, a sense of betrayal, injustice, loss of identity, and loss of lifestyle, which ultimately led to the tragic outcome in 1989. All right. So, this situation wasn't just he left his wife for another woman. He became a power imbalance story, a financial control story, an identity loss story, a legal system strategy story. The real lesson, what we're tapping into, is Betty didn't just lose her husband, y'all. She lost her identity, her lifestyle, her stability, and sense of control all at once. Dan did not just move on. He rebuilt his life immediately while she was still trying to survive the collapse of hers. Okay, now, these are the main bullet points that I want to also make clear as part of this situation. Please hit the likes, hit the likes, hit the likes if you have not done so. 1, being chosen is not the same as being secure. Okay. Let me also state this. Betty was dealing with a lot. The replacement, humiliation, powerless, aging, status loss, family disruption, all of that. So these are the factors that will help to kind of tie into those things, right? Dan pursued Betty heavily in the beginning. Yet the marriage still fell apart. Pursuit proves desire in the moment, not loyalty for a lifetime. Next, traditional devotion can become dangerous when it erases selfhood. Betty was raised in a culture that emphasized wifehood, family, respectability, and sacrifice. That likely strengthened her loyalty, but it also may have left her emotionally over-dependent on the marriage. And that's a big thing. Wives, married women get asphyxiated on that traditional loyalty. And what tends to happen is you become overly asphyxiated on becoming too codependent. Next, supporting a man's rise does not guarantee he will honor you once he arrives. Betty helped sustain the family during lean years. Dan later became wealthy and powerful. That history did not protect their marriage, okay? Next, women need identity outside of marriage. A wife should have purpose, confidence, emotional grounding, and something of her own. When marriage becomes the whole self, divorce or betrayal can feel like psychological death, okay? Emotional devastation is real, but violence is still a choice. Betty's pain may explain the why, but it cannot excuse the murder. She killed Dan and Linda on November 5th, 1989, and was later convicted. So, y'all, Betty got to a point where she just could not stomach any more of being defeated by Dan. So, she took it upon herself to get the key. Keep in mind, at the time, they still had shared custody of their children. And the kids would go and visit Betty. And by then, the kids was a little older. They was teenagers, except for the two boys at the time. I think they was under 10 years old. One was like 9, and the other one was like 7, something like that. But they're old enough to understand, put it that way. So they would still, you know, I guess Dan felt like, well, let me just give her something. I'll at least let her see the kids. I'll throw her a Scooby snack. So what happened was her daughter and Dan made it clear to the daughter that, look, me and your mom are not in the best of terms. So if you go, when you do go to your mom's house, make sure your house key is nowhere within her reach. Okay, I don't need your mom having access to the house. Now, keep in mind, back then, there was no key lock pads or none of that. You had to use an actual key. And what happened was, when the daughter, kids, went to stay with Betty, the oldest daughter missed and left her key where Betty could find it to Dan and Linda's house. And when Betty got access to the key, being emotionally on 1,000, and I guess having it repeatedly eat at her in her mind of all she lost, of all she sacrificed, it just drove her to the edge to literally drive over there. And that's what she did. And when she drove over there, she got the keys, unlocked the door, walked up the stairs into the bedroom where Linda and Dan was sleeping. Neither one had no clue she was in there. And she went upstairs and she pow. Took both of them. Now keep in mind, Linda died instantly. Okay, I think she was shot to the back of her head. Dan, on the other hand, was still kind of holding on. I think she shot him like in the back or something like that. Nevertheless, he still was consciously in his right mind. He knew what had happened. However, because of the gunshot wound, he was not in a position to be able to do anything about it. But what he tried to do was, the little life he had left, he tried to make a call. He picked up the phone so he can call, I guess, 911. She snatched the phone out of his hand and she finished him off and shot him one more time. So the last face he remembered seeing before he crossed over was Betty's. Okay. All right. And that's how that ended up. Betty's Broderick story is what happens when a woman builds her whole identity around a title that another person has the power to take away. Wife is a role. Mother is a role. But if you have no identity outside of those roles, betrayal can feel like the end of your existence. And that is a dangerous place to live. I would say this. Linda was not there for the foundational years of sacrifice that Betty believed gave her a permanent claim to that life. And I think that's what ultimately definitely triggered her. Okay, now I'm going to show one or two things before I get ready to shut it down, because I'm definitely going way in over my time. But I want to share this part with y'all so y'all can kind of understand what Betty felt like at that moment when Dan was pretty much, calling the shots and controlling the narrative of how the marriage would end or take place. All right, okay, so let me show y'all this.
Never ever sue the driver who crashed into you.
Okay, hold on, y'all. Hold on, because, let me get this for y'all right quick. All right, so I just want to show y'all something really quick. Okay, so I'm going to show y'all a quick interview in which she kind of talks about how Dan started behaving just a little bit. Okay, and I'm not going to play the whole thing. I'm just going to play what's important. Okay, so let's get to it.
Drastically, from a millionaire's wife to prisoner number W42477. These photographs, taken on their wedding day in April of 1969, show a 21-year-old bride of striking beauty and her handsome young groom. Betty worked as a teacher to help pay the bills and put Dan through Cornell Medical School and Harvard Law School. Finally, their years of struggling paid off. Betty and Dan had 4 beautiful children, a 5-bedroom home in a ritzy San Diego suburb, and a ski condo in Colorado. Then, Dan hired 𝓜𝓸𝓬𝓱𝓪'𝓼, a dazzling 22-year-old, to work as his legal assistant. Dan and Linda fell in love. After 16 years of marriage to Betty, Dan filed for divorce, and their breakup was vicious. Broderick versus Broderick began with a vengeance and ended in tragedy. On November 5th of 1989, just before dawn, a desperate Betty Broderick drove to the lavish home of her ex-husband. Betty went to the second-floor master bedroom, where she found Dan and his 28-year-old bride, Linda, asleep. She pulled out a revolver and showered the sleeping couple with bullets. Linda died instantly, and Dan minutes later. Before Betty fled the house, she yanked their phone out of the wall. Betty's first trial ended with a hung jury, but her second trial finished with 2 second-degree murder convictions. She could spend the rest of her life in prison, and she has joined us from prison by satellite. Hello, Betty. How you doing?
Hi, fine.
I would like, if you can, to take us back to the kind of life that you had. You married, and for a while, certainly did appear to have the Beaver Cleaver family.
This is fair use, using this content for educational and entertainment purposes only. Please make sure y'all hit the like button. Thank you.
And Beaver
Exactly.
Cleaver. Yes.
Exactly, that's true. I thought we did have a perfect marriage. We had a lot in common. When we met, we were very happy together, and we had a lot in common. We had common goals. I wanted a large Catholic family, and he wanted to be very successful. I took those marriage vows, and I believe he did at the time too, believing that we'd be together and we'd work together and we'd get through everything and we'd build a life for ourselves and our children.
So when did you start to sense things were going wrong?
Dan was never a womanizer. I never doubted where he was going. We had total trust in one another, as we should have, because we were committed. But in 1983, I noticed Dan at a party talking about some girl that he thought was really beautiful. And that was my first clue that 𝓜𝓸𝓬𝓱𝓪'𝓼 existed.
Okay. And 𝓜𝓸𝓬𝓱𝓪'𝓼 was the assistant that he'd hired for himself. Is that true?
She was the receptionist in the law building where he worked. And then he subsequently, after becoming involved with her, hired her in September '83.
Did you ask him if he was having an affair?
Yes.
And he said,
totally denied it and said I was imagining things and I was crazy, and that Linda was a sweet, innocent young girl, and there was absolutely nothing going on. Never was. And oh, and by the way, you're fat, old, boring, ugly, and stupid just started coming on the scene then. He was unhappy with everything in his life.
He told you that you were fat and old and boring and stupid? He said
yes,
those words
and he
to you?
didn't like our home, and he didn't like our children, and it was, to me, it was an absolute classic midlife crisis. And I devoured every book on the subject.
To the point of even he got the red Corvette. Is that true?
Got the red Corvette, the risky business sunglasses, the scarf around his neck, the leather jacket. I told him he was the American joke. If only he would go to a therapist of some sort. But he wouldn't.
Now,
and he never admitted the affair.
Why did you carry the gun if you only wanted to talk?
I did bring the gun as a way to make Dan and Linda listen to me. For the first time in this whole thing, I couldn't prevail in court no matter what. Dan was the kingpin in this town legally.
Well, I understand what you're saying, but Betty, people are dead.
Every time I went to his house to talk to him, and that's what I did every time he had me cornered, I went there to talk to him. And if he saw me coming, he'd call the police and have me arrested.
But that morning, the gun was in the car. You consciously took the gun out of the car. You went up the stairs to talk to them. And what happened?
And to keep them from calling the police. I was going to make them listen and talk to me. I opened the door. It wasn't closed tightly. As I opened the door and entered the room, Linda said, "Call the police." Dan went for the phone, and I screamed, "No!" And just the gun went off, And that's as fast as it happened.
A lot of people have said that Betty Broderick is a heroine because of, she took matters into her own hand. To me, it seems, and maybe you will agree, Betty, that what you really did was you lost yourself. And you said at the beginning that you wanted a lot of women to understand how difficult the court system is. I think it's important for women to know that you don't give up your entire identity to someone else. Don't you think that's important, Betty?
That's very important. But the way that I was raised, that's what I was taught, is that love is putting the other person first and making the other person happier than you are.
And y'all, I will leave it at that. Like I said, there's a whole lot to unfold with this. And again, if you put in a Betty Broderick interview, she will really go speak deep into the dynamics of why she felt it was necessary to just center her life around just being a wife and being a mother. And I would tell all women this, even if you're happily married, it's very important that your identity is not only based on being a wife and having a family, because God forbid, even if he doesn't take the measures Dan has, but if he passes away or something happens, you need to know that you still can function and survive without your significant other. But y'all have hung in there with me for an hour and 30 minutes. So I am going to shut it down from here, y'all. And next, we got plenty more good content coming your way. So y'all, leave y'all comment below. Let me know what you think about this whole situation. Also keep in mind, Betty is still in prison. Okay. She's never getting out. Just in case I did not specify that. Also, Linda and Dan has been buried within the same grave site or whatever. So they were also buried together. All of Linda's children are really successful. I think Dan's son has become a lawyer. So despite all of what they have gone through as children, they still, became successful and still kept the tradition of, the Broderick family in good standing. So, yes, the Brodericks are doing, the Broderick's children are doing really well. Okay, so just going to show you the graveyard of Dan and Linda. And as y'all can see, they both were buried together. November 5th. Now, this is the irony. Betty's birthday is November 7th. The same day as my birthday, y'all. November 7th. Isn't that ironic? So she'll never forget the day that she took both of their lives, because it's 2 days before her birthday, y'all. Also, like I stated, let me see what else to show y'all in here. Okay, so just showing y'all some more pictures of the Brodericks out of respect for them. Because again, you have to tell two sides of the story. So this is Dan. The last photo people kind of remember of him. Okay, the graveyard, of course. This is Dan again. Dan and Linda. Okay, Dan and Linda again. All right, and of course, their wedding. Yeah. So, definitely heart goes out to all the families. This is Dan and Betty's children. Linda did not have any children yet, but she was planning on doing so. Okay. Yes. So, there's a whole lot to be uncovered in this, y'all. And it's just a very unfortunate situation, but I just want to share that with y'all. Do not create an identity only around your companion. Anyway, leave y'all comment below. Let me know what you think. Please hit that like button right now at the second if you have not done so. I would gladly appreciate that. Y'all be safe, and I will talk with y'all another time.